I'm Jonah Comstock, editor-in-chief of pharmaphorum. I'm here at Frontiers Health 2022. I'm with Matt Holt, the publisher of the healthcare blog, Found 2.0, and generally needs no introduction to those in the digital health space, right, Matt?
I don't think so. I think anybody who's in the digital health space now, Jonah, who's been there, more recently than you and I've been in it, probably doesn't know who the hell I am anymore.
It's moved on from the glory days.
Moved on, yes. It's yesterday's news, or maybe lost 2 decades ago's news. Maybe I don't know.
So, what's your focus on these days, Matthew? When it comes to digital health and health tech, what are you really interested in?
So I'm since as you know, I ran Health 2.0 at the conference for many years, and as you know, I sold it to HIMSS, which at the time you were working for was after Moby Health News went to HIMSS. So we've had that sort of similar background in assessing and looking at and the evolution of what's now called digital health, but had about 15 different names before that, right? Health 2.0, M-Health, e-health, health tech, God knows whatever. So I think my focus is primarily on trying to figure out how that is integrating into the real world of healthcare. It was always kind of a parallel track, and it still is to some extent. And right out in the background now, you have people here at Frontiers talking about digital therapeutics and how do they get included into healthcare. But I'm really interested mostly in what's happening in the wider world of healthcare. What's happening in the sort of the evolution of medical groups in the U.S., the evolution of health plans in the U.S., the evolution of health systems globally, the developed world, but I don't know much in the developing world. And how does technology, fit in, and is there going to be the change that we've kind of been thinking all this technology was going to produce, and it hasn't really produced yet?
So there was a bit of back and forth on that topic this morning, and I saw you comment on it on Twitter with Jeff Dashis at One Drop, who was really kind of arguing that we're not going to be able to fit the new world of digital health and health tech into the old infrastructures of health and ecosystems. And you sort of alluded to there being a little bit of a ongoing debate about that question and two sides of that. So tell me a little more about where you sit on that.
Well, there's a very specific debate about whether you can prescribe a digital therapeutic the way you can prescribe a drug and sort of drop it in. And we've seen the Germans start with DIGA, the experiment of doing that, and some attempts have been made in the US to do that as well, right? To actually say, can you prescribe this thing? And you've had a number of companies, obviously Pear, Akili, and some others who've set up precisely to do that, to be a prescribed digital therapeutic that looks very like a prescribed drug, and they've been spending money in R&D the way that a startup biotech company would do the same thing. My struggle with that is it's kind of like Jeff was sort of saying it's not going to fit because it's just not going to flow into the main way that healthcare is delivered. My debate, my objection to that is a little bit more philosophical, which is that number one, we shouldn't be trying to imitate drugs because drugs are too expensive in the US. No, they're an inhibitor. We have many arguments, as you know, about access to care and access to drugs. And some of those expensive drugs, formulated for the US, don't make it to Europe and elsewhere because they're just too damn expensive, and the payers won't pay. So we shouldn't be trying to make digital therapeutics expensive. Now, number two is that software is the beauty of software, the beauty of the idea of health technology and health 2.0 stuff and the M-Health stuff that you were talking about years ago was the ability was that you should be able to scale this thing very quickly, and it should be used by many millions of people without needing professionals or sort of permission to get in the way. So when you tell me this has to go through the same channel of we have to prescribe a drug because it's dangerous or because there are side effects or what have you, in general that's not the case for most digital therapeutics. There may be some which have safety issues and what have you, and maybe there should be there's an approval process for them. But in general, what we're mostly doing is taking things that work fine on a person-to-person basis, things like cognitive behavioral therapy or other types of treatment or telehealth or other types of coaching support. I mean, we should be able to make them much more widely available using technology. And so I'm with Jeff, and I think that maybe it will get put into the current healthcare system, but we should be really trying to think about how should we be building a healthcare system that takes advantage of these technologies and makes them available to as many people as who need them, millions and millions of people, at a lower cost, because that's really the goal we should be aiming at. Now, I know costs aren't quite as bad in Europe as they are in the US, but they're not great.
So that's a super interesting take, I think. Because I think for a long time the digital therapeutic um, industry has focused on some of the traditional hallmarks of therapeutics as sort of a watermark for legitimacy, right? We've got the RCTs just like drugs have. We've got the regulatory clearances just like drugs have. We've got, we're being prescribed. And what you're saying is, slow down, like, are those really features or are they bugs, right? If
Yeah.
you're cramming yourself into this system, is it actually impairing your ability to get your product out to the people that need it?
I'm always a little bit suspicious of that we have to do an RCT and make it look like a drug. So a number of things is that there are lots of problems with RCT, trials for drugs, and then once the drug gets on the market for one RC, for one indication, it gets used for lots of different things, right? And then there are lots of games played about drugs. I mean, I think Humira was supposed to go off patent in 2017, and it's still, going to be under patent for the next 5 years because of the games played by the lawyers, right? It's not new R&D. It's like new indications and new uses of what is a great drug, but shouldn't be that expensive, right? So that's one thing, is that how do the games get played? But secondly, if you go to more general medical care, and I've had this conversation, with many people, including the CEO of the AMA and others, it's not like everything that is out there and all the treatment that's been delivered and all the care that's been delivered is according to the guidelines, according to the books, and according to what the trial said. It's always been a bit of a messy existence, and we should be trying to highlight what the best things are to do, but then spread them more quickly. And going through that strict sort of FDA or micro, or whatever the Europeans are using now, route, to me isn't necessarily the best way to do that for these prescription therapeutics. Plus, although they are intended in many cases to be used as a standalone digital product, a lot of them are going to end up being used with some type of health professional, a coach, a low-level health professional. Even if a doctor doesn't, we don't require a doctor. So I want to get us away from the idea of having to access a clinician, but there are going to a highly paid clinician. There are going to be a lot of other people who are going to support in the process, and we need to use the technology to empower them. And frankly, some of the best work that's been done on this has been done in the developing world, where you have low-level health workers who are able to access knowledge and access tools and technologies, in remote areas, using cell phones and others, which they would not have been able to do before. And that's kind of the model we want to bring, I think, into the more developed world.
That's really interesting. To what you said before about scale and how digital therapeutics are really supposed to, scale the previously unscalable. I think we're seeing that a lot in the mental health space, and we're seeing companies being bolder. I think companies like Wobot and like Big Health, being bolder about saying, for the basic stuff, for the kind of most low level category of therapeutic needs, a chatbot really can get a lot of the way there. And that's such a touchy message, because I know you've been around for all the conversations of like, will AI replace doctors? Will computers replace? And now we're kind of trying to iron out the nuance of that. Like, it's a tool, and it can be used without a physician in these cases. But how do you navigate that and make sure that like you're really getting the benefit out of the scale that digital therapeutics offer, but you're not uh, putting someone at risk by taking a therapist out of the equation when they might really need one?
Well, you've got two things going on. One is the sort of massive ramp up of online therapy, which did involve humans, sometimes involved them as doing text messaging stuff, and maybe lower incidence of interaction, as it were, than compared to going to a physical visit. In some ways, that's good. But included from a lot of companies, and I won't name names other than Cerebral and Dun and others, but companies who are, were viewed as being, just allowing people to access dangerous medication too quickly without enough supervision. So you've got to kind of unplug that part. But if you get to some of the companies you mentioned, so I think Big and Wobot, especially Big, has done a lot of great clinical work on its tools, and shown that they're very effective. Again, you need them. I think it's great. You need them to be introduced as a wider range of services as a whole that more people can get to. But if you can augment clinicians, and you can do 85% of it with a software-based tool, which should be pretty cheap if you can scale there enough people, that enables you to do a lot about the shortage of highly trained clinical staff, which we're going to have on an ongoing basis. It takes too long to train doctors. We're not training enough. Even lower level, lower qualified folks like nurses and nurse practitioners and PAs, we're not training enough of. So by definition, we are going to have, if we're going to survive the onslaught of chronic illness, the increase in mental health conditions that we've had, not to mention the growing the aging of the population, we're going to require a lot more technological help. And I would say that the chatbots, they're a camel's nose under the tent, but there's a lot more automation to come, and there's a lot more going to be physical automation. We haven't quite got the self-driving car yet, but we are going to get things like robotic assists and stuff in nursing homes, because if you look at the demographics, there's no other way we're going to, when you and I, well, me, when I'm certainly you, but when I'm an old man in the not too distant future in a nursing home, there aren't enough people around to wipe my ass. If we don't figure out some technology to automate that. So I think that this debate is going to go on and on. But if you just look at the demographics and the needs, we're going to need much more automation, because otherwise the numbers just don't work. So you can argue back and forth about AI replacing doctors, but it's not replacing doctors. It's going to be replacing nothing.
I mean, you mentioned chronic conditions there, and I think that's kind of the last piece of this puzzle, and a reason why someone like Jeffrey, not just who's with One Drop, who's focused on diabetes, sort of say we need to rebuild the system. We can't cram it into the system, because chronic conditions represent such a huge percentage of the costs in the healthcare system, and the healthcare system is much better set up to deal with acute care than it is to deal with chronic care, whereas digital therapeutics are pretty well set up to deal with chronic care and not to acute care. So when I think about how do we rebuild the system to better accommodate digital therapeutics, and almost another way to ask the question is, how do we rebuild the system to better treat chronic diseases, and are digital therapeutics part of that solution? I got a long way without asking a question.
No. Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, they are part of that solution, but they're not all of that solution, right? So we still have, in most countries, and I know the UK and the US best, we still have very large hospital systems set up, in the UK's case, with a limited amount of dollars behind pounds. Well, it's worth less than a dollar these days, or worth almost the same as a dollar. Limited amount of resources behind them to kind of limit the amount that's spent on specialty care. In the US, obviously, there's much bigger budget for the hospital systems, and they themselves are set up as very aggressive non-profit-ish corporations designed to increase the flow of patients into their acute care settings. And so people haven't thought about population health and primary care the way the way that policy wonks, and people like me think they should have done. So I think the question is, can you build a set of new types of medical groups, essentially new types of care providers who focus on primary care and chronic conditions, the primary care of those with chronic conditions, which is the biggest part. And I think you potentially can, although I'm a bit worried about the fact that several people had a run of it lately and seem to be doing badly. I mean, Amazon is the big example. They set up what looked like was going in that direction with Amazon Cares and kind of bailed and bought One Medical. Some of the systems that are set up in the US to deal with Medicare Advantage, such as IORA, which got bought by One Medical, but also Oak Street and some of the others, seem to be struggling a little bit, at least on the stock market, or maybe their expectations on the stock market were just way too high for them. So I guess the question is, can you get enough people into a system where the primary care and the chronic care management is designed to keep them away from the acute care hospital settings? And will the powers that be in the acute care hospital systems, who are the most powerful and richest people in American healthcare, allow that to happen? Or will they take over those organizations and kind of subsume them and in some ways put them out of business, much in the way that some large healthcare associations took over small publications and conferences and managed to squash them too.
Gonna get me in trouble, Matt. I mean, I could keep talking about this with you for ages. But I think we've probably got to go eat lunch or something.
Oh, I'll look forward to that. In Italy, food should be good.
Thanks so much, Matt. As always, you've got a great perspective on the industry, and it's great to catch up with you.
Thanks, Jonah. Real pleasure. I like the suit, even though it's not Italian.